Buzz with a voicemail from Dad. We've jet out, Mom. We need the room for real family. The words were sharp as the November wind slicing through my cardigan. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I thought I was still standing in the hallway, suitcase in hand, smelling last night's burned coffee drifting from the kitchen. My daughter, Claire, didn't flinch. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, her hand stayed on the doorframe, blocking me like I was a stranger selling something. For a second, I thought she was joking. What if phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad? But her eyes were as cold as the frost on the porch rail. I'd raised her in this house, paid the mortgage when her father lost his job. For that when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, painted that very door frame every spring. Now I was an intruder in the place where I'd patched her scraped knees and baked her birthday cakes. When my phone a voicemail from Dad, I stepped past her just enough to feel the warmth from the living room fireplace. The heat brushed my face, but the welcome was gone. Buzzmans with a voicemail from Dad, my hands tightened on the suitcase handle until my knuckles ached. Claire, it's 30 degrees out. She shrugged, buzzed it with a voicemail from Dad, eyes drifting past me like I wasn't there. You'll figure it out. Behind her, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. The family photo wall stared at me, our smiles from better years now just decorations. The frame from our trip to Lake Huron in '92 caught my eye. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, sand between our toes, Claire holding my hand like she'd never let go. My throat tightened. A floorboard creaked. Her husband, Mark, with a voicemail from Dad, appeared with a box under his arm. We packed some of your things. Didn't have room for everything. His voice was casual, like he was reading the weather. From Dad. What about the quilt from Mom? I asked. My voice cracked. Mark shifted the box. Guess it's in the shed. Would a voicemail from Dad? We'll see. Cold air swept him from the open door, carrying the smell of wet leaves. My chest felt hollow. With Woodthard buzz with a voicemail from Dad. My mind racer every sacrifice, double shifts at the diner, college tuition, the time I sold my wedding ring to fix Claire's car. And now, as with a voicemail from Dad, I was standing here waiting for permission to stay one more night. Where am I supposed to go? Claire crossed her arms. You've got your savings. When my phone buzzed voicemail from Dad, and your friends, the way she said friends dripped with was something between pity and mockery. Her words rattled in my head. Savings, friends. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, as if either could fill the space of family. I looked down at my old leather shoes, scuffed at the toes, soles worn thin. Shoes that had walked miles for her, with a voicemail from Dad. Shoes that had stood in hospital corridors when she was sick, in courtrooms when she needed support. Shoes that had been there, always there. Now, one thing when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, they felt heavier than my suitcase. I could have begged. Could have reminded her of every time I'd been the safety net she didn't deserve but always had. But something in me froze. All right, I said. My voice was steady, even if my hands weren't. Mark moved aside. Claire didn't butt us with a voicemail from Dad, not until I took that step toward the cold porch. Outside, the wind bit at my cheeks. The sun was setting behind bare trees, turning the sky a bruised purple. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. My breath came out in white clouds, curling into the air and disappearing, just like my place in their lives. I paused at the bottom of the steps. Voicemail from Dad. The gravel crunching under my shoes. A memory flashed. Claire, at 6 years old, running down these very steps, giggling, her hair flying behind her. Was with a voicemail from Dad. She jumped into my arms then, trusting I'd catch her. Now she couldn't even hold the door open. The suitcase wheels bumped along the uneven drive. With a voicemail from Dad, my fingers were numb by the time I reached the street. I didn't know where I was going. Not yet. But somewhere deep down, a quiet ember lit. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. It wasn't the fire of anger. Not yet. It was the first spark of something steadier. Because if they thought they could decide my place, when a phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, they'd forgotten one thing: this house wasn't entirely theirs to claim. With a voicemail from Dad, the scent of fresh cut grass used to drift through the open windows of the lake house every June. Back then, with a voicemail from Dad, the air off Clearview Lake was warm enough to carry the sound of loons across the water and gentle enough to make you forget winter even existed. With a voicemail from Dad, I can still feel the sunlight on my forearms as I stood at the kitchen counter, slicing peaches for a cobbler. Frank would be outside. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, sanding the porch rail he'd built with his own hands. Claire was 9 that summer. Her bare feet slapped across the pine floors as she ran from room to room. We buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, pretending she was the captain of a grand ship. The lake was her ocean, the porch her deck. She'd burst into the kitchen, cheeks flushed, 4th of I buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, asking if she could swim before dinner. I'd pretend to hesitate, then nod, just to see her beam. Those days felt endless. The lake house was our anchor, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. The place where life's storms couldn't reach us. Even when money was tight, Frank found a way to keep the property taxes paid, the roof sealed. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the wood stove stocked for winter. He used to say, "This house is more than walls. Maggie, it's our story." On cool summer nights, with a voicemail from Dad, we'd light a fire in the stone pit near the dock. The three of us would sit in lawn chairs roasting marshmallows, with a voicemail from Dad, the lake shimmering under a sky full of stars. Claire would crawl into my lap, smelling of lake water and smoke. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and I'd wrap her in a towel still warm from the dryer, she'd fall asleep there, her head heavy on my shoulder. I'd carry her inside, glance with a voicemail from Dad. I've passed to the front door Frank had carved our initials into. Frank's hands were always working, fixing a loose board, replacing a window pane. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, making sure the boat motor ran smooth. I teased him that he loved the house like a fourth family member, but I understood. I loved it too. With a voicemail from Dad. The way the morning light poured into the living room, the sound of rain on the tin roof, the creak of the stairs when you carried laundry up to the bedrooms. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, then there was the letter, the one Frank left me in the safe deposit box the last summer before he got sick. He'd written it in his careful, looping scriptful. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. "Maggie, no matter what happens, keep the lake house. It's your safe place. It's ours." I didn't know then how much those words would mean. With a voicemail from Dad. After Frank passed, Claire came home less. At first, I told myself it was the drive, her busy schedule, the boys' school. But over the years, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, her visits grew shorter, her voice on the phone colder. She stopped asking about the garden or if the loons were back. One August evening, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I was out on the dock alone. The air was warm, but the water was cooling, a sign that fall wasn't far. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I heard laughter from a pontoon boat passing by, a young couple with their kids, music playing low. It hit me then. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I was the only one left who felt this lake in my bones. By Thanksgiving 2 years ago, Claire didn't even come. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. She sent a card with a typed message and a photograph of the kids I barely recognized. I baked a pie anyway, ate one slice. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad and left the rest on the counter until it went stale, the lake house felt too big, the rooms echoing with a silence I couldn't fill. And then came last winter, with a voicemail from Dad. The day she locked me out with $5 in my hand, I remembered every peach I'd sliced, every marshmallow I'd toasted. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Every night I'd carried her inside wrapped in a warm towel. All of it felt like a different life. Now, standing outside that same lake house, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. The wind cutting into my cheeks, I thought about Frank's letter. I'd kept it hidden, along with the deed in the bank's safe deposit box. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Claire might think the house was hers to claim, but she'd never understood. This place was more than property. It was a promise. For my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I could see the lake from where I stood, frozen at the edges, reflecting the pale winter sky. It didn't care about our arguments or betrayals. Might Aline dare. Had it been here before us, and it would be here after, and maybe, just as maybe, so would I. The phone rang just after 9. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I was sitting at the small kitchen table in my rented room above the bakery, the scent of rising dough drifting up through the floorboards. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. My tea had gone lukewarm outside, snow tapped against the window like impatient fingers. I answered on the third ring. From Dad? "Hello. It's me?" Claire's voice snapped before I could say her name. "Do you know how inconvenient you've made things?" I blinked. With a voicemail from Dad. "Excuse me." Her sigh came sharp through the receiver. "You're still paying the property taxes on the lake house." When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, "It's confusing the paperwork I'm filing." I sat back, feeling the cold from the window at my shoulder. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. "Why would that confuse anything?" "Because," she said slowly, like explaining to a child, "I'm preparing to transfer ownership." But from Dad, "Potential buyers don't like messy titles. And you, hanging on like some stubborn relic, aren't helping." The word, relic, stung. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, my fingers tightened around the phone. I could hear faint clinking in the background, like she was washing dishes while dismantling my life. From Dad. "Foo, I've kept that house in shape for decades," I said. "Paid for every shingle, every nail." She gave a short, humorless laugh. Oh, please, Ken buzzed with a voicemail from You Live There. It's not like you were doing me a favor. I stared at the half-empty sugar jar on the table. A memory rose, unbidden Claire at 16, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail. From Dad, crying over a failed math test. I'd stayed up until 2 a.m. quizzing her, baking cinnamon rolls for breakfast so she'd wake up to comfort. With a voicemail from Dad, that same girl now couldn't see past the dollar signs in her eyes. Claire, I began keeping my voice even. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad at the lake house. What I know, she cut in, is that you're making this harder than it needs to be. Why can't you just let go? Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. You're 72. You should be grateful I'm even dealing with all this for you. I almost laughed. Grateful. For being erased from my own home. With a voicemail from Dad. Downstairs, I heard Evelyn's voice calling to a customer, the clatter of trays sliding into the oven. With a voicemail from Dad. The warmth and sweetness of the bakery felt like another world compared to the chill pouring through the phone. I don't think you understand. Oh. With a voicemail from Dad, Claire said, her voice rising. You've been selfish, always acting like the martyr. Well, newsflash, Mom say great. With a voicemail from Dad, the world doesn't revolve around your nostalgia. The words hit like a slap. My nostalgia. As if the house, the lake, when my phone buzzer voicemail from Dad, the life Frank and I built were just sentimental clutter. I didn't reply right away. I could hear her breathing waiting for me to break. Instead, I stood, the sipping living into the voicemail from Dad. Moving the dough, snow was falling harder now, flakes swirling under the streetlight. You done? I asked quietly. There was a pause. Then a sharp, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Unbelievable. And the line went dead. I stood there for a long time, the phone still warm in my hand. My tea was cold. The clock ticked toward 10. From Dad. I sank back into my chair, the wood creaking under me. My chest ached, not just from her words, but from the hollow space they left. Memories rushed in, with a voicemail from Dad. Claire, on her wedding day, me pinning the veil into her hair, her calling me at midnight from her first apartment, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, crying because the pipes burst and she didn't know what to do. Every time she'd needed me, I'd shown up. Every time. And now, from buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, all I got was relic. And selfish. The bakery bell jingled downstairs, followed by Evelyn's laugh. I thought about going down. With a voicemail from Dad, just to feel a little less alone. But I stayed put, staring at the frost gathering on the edges of the window pane. The lake house wasn't just nostalgia. A thirst. Bust if it was a voicemail from Dad. It was his security, it was the last piece of Frank I had left. And now, more than ever, I knew I wasn't letting it go. The phone rang again, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Starm was Tommy. His voice was low, urgent. Grandma, you need to know Mom's talking to a buyer. My grip on the phone tightened. From Dad. When? I heard them on the porch just now. She said she could convince you by spring. The bakery's warmth felt far away again. From Dad. My mind sharpened, cutting through for the fog of hurt. Thank you for telling me, sweetheart, I said. And don't worry. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Oh, your grandma's not done yet. When I hung up, I didn't sit back down. I went to my dresser, pulled out the small fireproof box. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad and checked the folder inside, the deed, the tax receipts, Frank's letter, still safe. I closed the box and set it on the table, the snow still falling outside. Buzz with a voicemail from Dad. Claire thought she'd silence me tonight. She had no idea she'd just lit the fuse. The envelope was thick, too thick for a casual letter. One own buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. It sat on my kitchen table like a lump of ice, cream-colored, my name printed in stiff black ink. No return address, just a faint watermark along the edge. When Vanwa buzzed with voicemail from Dad, I slid it open with the butter knife I'd used at breakfast. The paper inside smelled faintly of toner and some cheap cologne. Vooping my that when my phone buzzed with a voice no Dad, like it had passed through too many hands. Request for transfer of property ownership. The heading was bold-centered. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the kind of type that made your stomach drop before you'd read another word. My eyes skimmed down to the line with my name. It stated that Margaret Hill, with a voicemail from Dad, was to sign below acknowledging the transfer of the lake house to the new rightful owner, Claire Matthews. No mention of payment. Bliff or Lility when my phone buzzed course from Dad now, no mention of an agreement, just an assumption I'd go along. I read it twice, my pulse thudding in my ears. At the bottom, in blue ink, with a voicemail from Dad, was a sticky note in Claire's handwriting. Mom, just sign this. It'll make things easier for everyone. See, easier. For everyone, with a voicemail from Dad. The phone sat 3 inches away. I didn't touch it. I folded the papers back into the envelope, slower than I needed to, when phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Like delaying the next breath might change what I'd read. Through the window, the street was empty except for a dusting of fresh snow. With a voicemail from Dad, the smell of baking bread drifted up from Evelyn's ovens below, warm and soft, a world away from the cold knot in my chest. I finally reached for my checkbook. A voicemail from Dad, not to write anything but to check the stubs. The last property tax payment was there. November, $3.482. Paid from my own account. I flipped back. August, May. From Dad. February. Same thing, I'd been paying it all along. I got up, went to the small desk in the corner, with a voicemail from Dad, and pulled out the manila folder where I kept my bank statements. The numbers told the truth. Month after month, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I'd shouldered the weight of keeping the lake house afloat while Claire, apparently, planned to take it from under me. A knock on the door startled me. I opened it to find Evelyn, dusted with flour, holding a tray. "Leftover rolls," she said, her eyes scanning my face. With a voicemail from Dad. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I took the tray, setting it on the table. "Something like that." She hesitated. "From Dad." "Want to talk about it?" "Not yet," I said. My voice was too steady to be casual. She gave me a look that said she knew better, but she didn't press. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. When the door closed, I sat down again, the envelope beside the rolls. I traced the edge of the paper with one finger. My hands were cool. From Dad, but inside I felt heat rising. Not the kind you get from a fireplace when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but the kind that burns in your chest when someone crosses a line you didn't think they'd dare. Frank's voice came back to me. "Vom, Dad," clear as if he was leaning against the doorframe. "Keep the lake house. It's yours, Maggie." "Don't mind Farswe," with a voicemail from Dad. "Don't let anyone talk you out of it." The letter from Claire was more than a request. It was a test to see if I'd fold. I went to the fireproof box. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail, opened it and took out the deed. The paper was slightly yellowed at the edges, the ink still crisp. My name and Frank's were printed there, not black and undeniable. No amendment, no co-owner. Tucked behind it was the letter Frank had left me. I read it again. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the loops of his handwriting as familiar as the curve of his smile. He'd known, somehow, that this day might come. I put both documents back. Well, voicemail. Front foot locking the box with a click fit that felt like setting a boundary in stone. The phone buzzed. "A text from Claire, hope you got the letter." Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, "Let's handle this quick, okay?" I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I grabbed my coat and scarf, sliding the envelope into my bag. The cold outside was sharp, with a voicemail from Dad. The kind that makes your teeth ache. My boots crunched through the thin ice along the sidewalk as I headed toward the bank. Inside, with a voicemail from Dad. The warmth was tinged with the scent of polished wood and faint copier toner. I asked to see my safe deposit box. The voicemail from Dad. The clerk, a man with wire rim glasses, led me to the small room. I placed the deed from home alongside the copy in the box. Identical, secure, unchanged. Mail from Dad. "Would you like me to notarize any of these for additional protection?" the clerk asked. "Yes," I said without hesitation. 10 minutes later, with a voicemail from Dad, I walked out with the documents sealed in a new envelope, my name and the date stamped across it in bold. The sky was a flat winter gray when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but I felt something steadier inside me. Claire thought she was tightening her grip. What she didn't know was that I'd just strengthened mine. Vazitures with a voicemail from Dad. As I walked back toward the bakery, I rehearsed what I'd say when I finally called her. Not yet, but soon. For now, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I wanted her to believe I was still the Rillick she'd dismissed. The quieter she thought I was, the more room I'd have to move. Pafington by the fuzzed with a voicemail from Dad. The time I reached my building, snow had started falling again, heavier this time, coating the steps in white. I brushed it off the railing. And when phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the cold bite in my fingers. Upstairs, the rolls Evelyn had brought were still warm under their towel. I sat, broke one open, and let the steam rise into the air. Forl rewind when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. The smell reminded me of mornings at the lake house, when Frank would make coffee, and I'd pull bread from the oven for breakfast on the porch. I took a bite, with a voicemail from Dad, chewing slowly, eyes on the envelope from Claire. I didn't need to open it again to know what it said. With a voicemail from Dad. What she didn't know, and what I wouldn't tell her until the right moment, was that the lake house wasn't hers to sell. Now or ever, with a voicemail from Dad. And if she wanted to fight over it, I was ready. The days after the letter felt strangely hollow, like the world had been turned down to half its usual volume. With a voicemail from Dad. Even the bakery downstairs seemed quieter, though I knew Evelyn's ovens were still humming from dawn. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I spent most mornings by the small window in my rented room, watching the street. Snow piled against the curb, melting into dirty slush by mid-afternoon. With a voicemail from Dad. People passed by in twos and threes, shoulders hunched, boots kicking at the ice. No one looked up. The phone stayed mostly silent. Claire didn't call again. From that I didn't reach out. My sisters in Ohio had long since stopped checking in. Voicemail, Dad convinced I'd made my bed by letting Claire handle things after Frank died. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, friends I'd known from church sent Christmas cards with generic wishes but no return address for a proper reply. Isolation wasn't new to me, with a voicemail from Dad, but it felt different now, more deliberate, like I'd been quietly erased from the frame of my own life. Tommy was the exception. Every other day, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, he'd send a short text, "You okay, Grandma?" Or "Want me to come by?" He was only 17. Would have buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but he had Frank's quiet way of ask questions, like he already knew the answer and just wanted you to feel less alone in saying it. One Friday afternoon, Sheikh found the buzz with a voicemail from Dad that he showed up without warning. A light knock, then his lanky frame in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders. "Brought you something," he said, with a voicemail from Dad, holding up a paper bag. Inside was a steaming cup of cocoa from the cafe across town, the kind with real whipped cream that slid slowly down the sides. I smiled. With a voicemail from Dad, the first real one in days. "You're a good boy, Tommy." He shrugged, pulling off his gloves. "Mom's been in a mood. Would it Ford a voice fin talking to some realtor again?" I set the cocoa on the table, the sweet smell filling the room. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. "And, what do you think about that?" He glanced toward the window, as if checking for his mother's shadow. "I think she's wrong." With a voicemail from Dad, Grandpapa wouldn't want it sold, and he hesitated, then looked at me directly. "And I think you've got something planned." I didn't confirm it. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but I didn't deny it either. Sometimes the best plans are the ones no one sees coming. We sat for a while, talking about school. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, his part-time job at the hardware store, but underneath it all I could feel the thread between us tightening, an unspoken pact that whatever came next. With a voicemail from Dad, he'd stand with me after he left. The room felt quieter than before. The cocoa cup sat empty, the cream dried along the rim. I rinsed it in the sink, with a voicemail from Dad. My fingers aching in the cold water. Nights were the worst. I'd lie in bed, the streetlight casting a pale square on the ceiling, with a voicemail from Dad, listening to the muted thump of someone's footsteps in the hallway. My mind would drift back to the lake house, with a voicemail from Dad, to the way the moonlight shimmered on the lake through the upstairs window. With a voicemail from Dad, that was the view Frank loved, the one he said made the world feel wide enough to start over in. I missed that view more than I missed most people. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad at night. I dreamed I was back on the porch, a mug of coffee in my hands, the boards warm under my feet. But when I turned to go inside, the door was locked. And I buzzed with it a voicemail. From Dad, I could hear Claire laughing somewhere inside, the sound muffled, like I wasn't worth raising her voice for. I woke with my heart pounding, for in my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the sound still echoing in my ears. The next day, Evelyn caught me staring out the bakery window while waiting for a loaf to cool. "You're too quiet, Huggy," she said. Quiet is fine for baking bread, not for letting someone take your life apart." Her words stuck with me as I walked back upstairs. With a voicemail from Dad, the bag warm in my hands, I thought about Frank's letter, about the deed locked away, about the envelope Claire had sent. With a voicemail from Dad, what now was still tucked in the drawer like a snake waiting to strike. The isolation was sharp, but it was also clarifying. Bought with a voicemail from Dad. Without the noise of constant calls or the distraction of visitors, my mind had room to settle on what mattered. I began making small notes, dates, amounts. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, copies of tax receipts slipped into a folder marked with nothing more than a pencil line. If Claire wanted to believe I was fading into the background, phone buzzed with a voicemail from that was fine. Let her, because the less she saw me moving, the more she'd be caught off guard when I did. By late January, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the snow was knee-deep along the lake roads. I imagined the lake house buried under it, the porch rail Frank built iced over but still holding firm. Just like me. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Tommy's next visit was short. He had basketball practice, but before he left, he pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. With a voicemail from Dad. Found this in the garage at the lake house, he said. Thought you'd want it. It was a photo, creased at the edges, when buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, of Frank and me sitting on the porch steps, Claire between us, all three of us smiling. The summer light was golden, the lake a bright mirror behind us. My phone buzzed it with a voicemail from Dad. I held it for a long time after he left, tracing the outline of Frank's hand on my shoulder. Isolation might have been Claire's way of weakening me. Instead, with a voicemail from Dad, it was sharpening my focus. And soon I'd be ready to remind her and anyone else that a woman alone isn't necessarily a woman defeated. Bothard? Falfard, the invitation came in a text, 2 lines, no greeting. Family dinner Saturday, 7 p.m. at Lakeside Grill. Fen dress decent. I stared at it for a full minute. No please, no explanation. I almost deleted it. Was tipping mind when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but a part of me wanted to see what she'd do next when I showed up on my own terms. Saturday evening was bitter cold, the kind that seeped into your bones. With a voicemail from Dad. I wore my navy wool coat and the silver scarf Frank had bought me in Traverse City years ago. The Lakeside Grill's windows glowed warm against the dark. One of my phone bows we thwabdald. Thubby's gowd, the smell of grilled salmon and rosemary bread greeting me before I even opened the door. Inside, laughter and the clink of silverware filled the air. With a voicemail from Dad, the hostess led me toward the long table near the back. Claire was at the head, her hair perfectly curled, a glass of white wine in hand. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Beside her sat her husband, Grant, flipping through the wine list like it was a ledger. The rest of the family was scattered along the table. Claire's boys. Fawn buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. A couple of cousins I hadn't seen in years, and at the far end, Tommy. He caught my eye and gave the smallest nod. I took a seat midway down, with a voicemail from Dad, placing my coat on the back of the chair. Conversations hushed for a moment, then resumed. Claire didn't acknowledge me until the appetizers arrived. With a voicemail from Dad. So, she said, her voice carrying just enough to reach both ends of the table. I hear you've been busy, Mom. Still the voicemail on, still hanging onto that old place? I kept my tone light. You mean the lake house? Yes, I still take care of it? She smiled without warmth. Funny. With a voicemail from Dad, most people your age are downsizing, not clinging to relics. A few people chuckled. Not loudly, but enough. The word relic again. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad like she'd branded me with it, I reached for my water glass, letting the cool rim steady my hand. Some things are worth keeping. Claire leaned back, though was sipping my latte when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, clearly enjoying herself. Of course, keeping something means you can afford it. We wouldn't want anyone to think you're, struggling. The implication landed. I could feel eyes on me measuring, judging. I set my glass down. I've managed just fine. She tilted her head. From Dad. Have you? Because I happen to know property taxes aren't cheap. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and it's not like you've got steady income anymore. The air at the table shifted, subtle but there, my jaw tightened. I could see Tommy frown. With a voicemail from Dad, his fork poised over his plate. Claire wasn't done. Maybe it's time to be practical. Cash out while you still can. When Thome buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I'm sure everyone here would agree that holding on to an old, creaky house out in the middle of nowhere isn't wise. It was a performance, with a voicemail from Dad, and each word meant to strip me down in front of an audience. I could have stayed quiet, let the moment pass. But then the waiter arrived, with a voicemail from Dad, setting a small plate in front of me, a plate I hadn't ordered. It was the Lakeside's pecan pie, still warm. With therefore fun of a voicemail from Dad with a scoop of vanilla ice cream melting into the crust, and on the side, a folded note. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I glanced toward the kitchen and caught a glimpse of an older man in a chef's coat, his white hair catching the light. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, he lifted 2 fingers in a discreet salute. The note read, Frank's favorite table is still reserved for you anytime. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. David, memories rushed in. Frank and I here on our anniversaries. David saving us the corner table with the lake view. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Always bringing out pie on the house. I slid the note into my pocket before Claire could see it. With a voicemail from Dad. The heat of humiliation in my chest cooled into something steadier. Practicality has its place, I said, cutting a small bite of pie. But so does loyalty. Thindevdad 2 people. To promises? Claire gave a tight laugh. Well, if you think promises pay the bills, they do, I said, my voice sharper now, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. When you make the right ones to the right people. For a moment, the table was silent except for the scrape of forks, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Tommy's mouth curved into the smallest smile. Claire's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing more. Instead, she lifted her glass in a mock toast. Voicemail from Dad. To family, she said. The words tasted false in the air, but I raised my water glass anyway, holding her gaze. Dinner dragged on, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Filled with small talk and the occasional pointed jab from her end of the table. But every so often I'd feel the folded note in my pocket, with a voicemail from Dad. A quiet reminder that not everyone had forgotten the woman I used to be. When the plates were cleared and coats collected, Tommy walked me to the door. That was something, he murmured. She wanted to humiliate me, I said. She didn't get the whole show? Outside, the cold hit hard. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the lake wind cutting through the street. I pulled my scarf tighter, the note still safe in my pocket. Claire thought she'd made her point tonight. With the voicemail from Dad, she had no idea she'd just given me another alley. Because David knew me, and David knew the lake house, and he owed me a favor. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. 2 days after dinner at Lakeside Grill, I woke to the sound of the mail slot snapping shut. The winter light through the curtains was pale, almost colorless, with a voicemail from Dad, the kind that made everything feel suspended. I shuffled to the door, the floor cold under my slippers. A thin stack of envelopes lay on the mat, utility bill, with a voicemail from Dad, a flyer for carpet cleaning, and a thick, cream-colored envelope marked important property records. I carried it to the table, with a voicemail from Dad, my hands tightening as I slid it open. Inside the printed statement from the county registrar's office. Change of title request pending. First with a voicemail from Dad, my eyes moved to the date. Filed last week. The new owner, Field Reedy Claire Matthews. And under supporting documents, there it was, property deed, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, signed by current owner. I sat back hard. I hadn't signed anything. The smell of yeast and cinnamon drifted up from the bakery below. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, warm and maddeningly normal. I reached for the phone, dialing the registrar's number. A woman with a clipped voice answered. Property records, with a voicemail from Dad. How may I help you? This is Margaret Hill. I just received a statement showing a change of title for my lake house property. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I did not authorize it. She hesitated. 1 moment, ma'am. I'll pull up the file. I could hear the faint tapping of keys. With a voicemail from Dad, the hum of some old fluorescent light buzzing through the line. Here it is, she said finally. A voicemail from Dad. It shows a deed signed by you and notarized at Greenleaf Bank. My grip tightened on the receiver. That's impossible. With a voicemail from Dad, I haven't been eating that in months. Another pause. Would you like me to email you a scanned copy?
Yes,
Please? Minutes later. Men buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. It landed in my inbox. I opened the PDF, the glow of the screen reflecting off the window. There was my name, my address, my property description. With a voicemail from Dad. And there, my signature, except it wasn't mine. The loops were too wide, the tail of the curling the wrong way. With a voicemail from Dad. And the notary's stamp, dated the day after I'd received Claire's original letter. Belonged to someone I'd never met. I forwarded the file to myself. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, then to a folder on my external drive. I printed 2 copies, slipping one into the folder with my real deed and tax receipts. Then I called the bank. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. The clerk on the other end confirmed the notary had indeed logged a visit under my name. She read the ID number aloud. It wasn't mine. With a voicemail from Dad. Can I get the security footage from that day? I asked. You'd need to file a formal request, she said. With a voicemail from Dad, and you'll probably need law enforcement involved. I thanked her, my voice steady, though my heart was thudding. By mid-afternoon, Flubverv would buzz with a voicemail from the clouds had thickened of stond. The street outside dim under the weight of snow. I pulled on my coat and scarf, the fake deed copy in my bag. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad and headed to Greenleaf Bank. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. A young teller looked up. From Dad. Can I help you? I need to speak to your branch manager, I said. Minutes later, a tall man in a charcoal suit appeared, his smile polite but guarded. From Dad. I introduced myself, laid the forged deed on his desk. That's troubling, he said, adjusting his glasses. I'll admit the notary stamp is ours. with a voicemail from Dad. But this signature? He compared it to my driver's license. Clearly not yours. Then how does it have your notary's stamp? He exhaled slowly, with a voicemail from Dad. If I had to guess, someone presented ID under your name and the notary didn't check closely enough. Or didn't care, I said. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, he flinched slightly but didn't deny it. I can give you the notary's name and the time of the transaction. When my phone buzzed with us from Dad, you should take this to the sheriff's office. I tucked the paper back into my bag. I will. On my way out, I passed the row of safety deposit boxes, with a voicemail from Dad, their brass numbers glinting under the lights. Mine was still there, holding the original deed. That gave me a flicker of relief. Outside, the wind had picked up, with a voicemail from Dad, carrying the metallic tang of impending snow. I stopped at the cafe across the street for coffee, phone buzz with a voicemail from Dad, needing something hot to cut through the cold gnawing at my chest. As I stirred cream into cup, my phone buzzed. A message from Tommy, Grandma. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Mom's got a man in a suit at the lake house. They're going through your desk. The spoon clattered against the saucer. My desk. When a phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I was out the door before the coffee cooled, snow stinging my face. By the time I reached the lake house, the sky was sliding toward dusk. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the lake behind it, a dark stretch of steel. Tommy met me at the side door, his breath puffing in the cold. They're in the study, he whispered, with a voicemail from Dad. I stepped inside, the scent of pine and faint wood smoke wrapping around me like a memory. Down the hall, I could hear low voices. Claire's sharp. Have the man smoother. Papers rustled. I eased closer, stopping just before the doorway. She keeps everything in here, Claire was saying. Letters. Stuff. Old contracts. She's not exactly tech-savvy. The man chuckled. Makes our job easier. I felt my hands curl into fists. Voicemail from Dad. Job. Wasn't over yet either. I backed away before they saw me, slipping out the side door into the deepening cold. The snow crunched under my boots. A voicemail from Dad. The lake wind sharp against my cheeks. The forged deed. The bank's notary. Claire rifling through my desk. This wasn't just a grab for the lake house. Ford. This was a coordinated attempt to erase me entirely. I pulled out my phone. It's mail from Dad. Dialing a number I hadn't used in years. One belonging to a lawyer Frank had trusted. When his assistant answered, I said, Tell Mr. With her voicemail from Agree, it's Margaret Hill. And that I need to talk. Tonight, the clock on the nightstand glowed 2:14 a.m. I lay on my back, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, staring at the faint crack in the ceiling, the one I'd noticed the first night I moved into this little rented room. When I buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the hum of the bakery's refrigerators below was steady, almost like a heartbeat, but it couldn't drown out the noise in my head. With a voicemail from Dad, Claire's voice from the study kept looping back. She keeps everything in here? Followed by the man's chuckle. I rolled onto my side, tipping when my phone buzzed, with a voicemail from Dad, pulling the blanket tie-dye. The air in the room was dry, the kind that made my throat ache. Outside, snow tapped against the window, light but insistent. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I tried closing my eyes, but Frank's face came to me, not the last image of him in the hospital, pale and tired, but younger, with a voicemail from Dad. The way he'd looked on the day we signed the papers for the lake house. His eyes had been bright that day, his hand firm on mine. Whatever happens, with a voicemail from Dad, Maggie, he'd said, Don't let anyone tell you this place isn't yours. We built it. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. We keep it. I could almost smell the lake air from that afternoon, cool and sharp with a hint of cedar from the dock. I sat up, foo with a voicemail from Dad, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. My feet found the worn slippers, the fabric soft but frayed. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I padded to the small desk under the window and switched on the lamp. The light was warm, pooling over the folder where I'd kept the real deed. From Dad, the tax receipts, and now the forged copy. I spread them out side by side. What's with a voicemail from Dad? The contrast was almost laughable, the smooth confidence of my real signature versus the clumsy loops of the fake. This wasn't just sloppiness. When my phone buzzed mailed, it was on. Whoever forged this thought I wouldn't fight. I reached for the small notepad I kept for grocery lists and began writing. Not a diary. With a voicemail from Dad, not a letter, but a list of steps. Secure all originals, double, check safety deposit box. Make certified copies, store in 3 separate locations. With a voicemail from Dad, contact Mr. Greer, confirm appointment. Identify bank notary, get statement in writing. Gather witnesses: Tommy, David from Lakeside, Evelyn from Bakery. Stay quiet, let Claire think she's winning. The last line I underlined twice. Quiet wasn't weakness, quiet was cover. Downstairs, with a voicemail from Dad, I heard Evelyn moving around. Too early for baking. Maybe she couldn't sleep either. I thought about going down, but I stayed put, focused. When I buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I pulled Frank's letter from the fireproof box. The paper had softened over the years, the ink slightly faded. He'd written it in his blocky. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, no nonsense style. If they ever try to push you out, remember who you are. And remember you've got more grit than they'll ever know. I read it twice, returned with a voicemail from then tucked it back. The wind outside picked up, rattling the window pane. I shivered, with a voicemail from Dad, not from the cold, but from the realization that the plan was already in motion. Hers and mine. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Tommy's, not from Dad. Lights still on at the lake house. Not Mom's car. I typed back, stay away tonight? Just watch? He replied with a thumbs up. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but I could imagine his frown, I went back to the list, adding another step: find out who's visiting the lake house after dark. Phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. By the time the first paean of morning slid between the curtains, the list had grown to a page and a half. My coffee was cooling beside me untouched. At 80:15, I called Mr. Greer's office. His assistant picked up. "Hey, can see you Thursday at 9, she said. "Tell him I'll bring proof," I replied. Everyone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. After hanging up, I changed into my wool skirt and sweater, laced my boots, and headed to Greenleaf Bank. I walked straight to the manager's office, laying the forged deed on his desk again. I need a written statement," I said. "Today, that this is not my signature." Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and that your notary handled it. He hesitated, then nodded. "I'll have it ready by this afternoon." I left with a copy of the visitor log from that day. Buzz with a voicemail from Dad. The name signed in wasn't mine, but the handwriting, it was familiar, too familiar. Back in my room, Fadmar buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I spread the log beside an old birthday card Claire had given me years ago. The slant of the letters was identical, with a voicemail from Dad. The cold in my chest wasn't from the winter anymore. I reached for the phone, but stopped. Calling her now would waste the advantage. Instead, with a voicemail from Guide, I added one last step to my list. Let her walk further into the trap. I leaned back, the hum of the bakery below grounding me. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. The smell of fresh bread rose through the floorboards. Warm and steady, she thought I was cornered. She thought my silence meant surrender. But I wasn't done. With a voicemail from Dad, and the next move would be mine. The morning after I finished my list, the snow had stopped. The air was sharp, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. So clear it felt like you could see right through the lake ice to the dark water below. I left the apartment early. The voicemail them. Dad, the forged deed, and the bank's visitor log tucked into my bag. Evelyn was just unlocking the bakery door. Out before sunrise. She asked, eyebrows lifting. With a voicemail from Dad. Just errands, I said, pulling my scarf tighter. No one needed to know more than that. My first stop was Greenleaf Bank's safety deposit vault. There buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. The steel door groaned as the manager unlocked it, the scent of cold metal and old carpet mixing in the air. I slid with a voicemail from Dad. I slid the narrow box onto the table in the viewing room, my fingers finding the thick envelope inside. The original deed, the tax receipts. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Frank's handwritten letter all exactly where I'd left them, I slipped them into a fresh fireproof sleeve, added 2 certified copies from Dad, and locked everything back in place. Step 1, secure. Next was the copy shop on Main. The machines hummed steadily. Voicemail from Dad Diode, spitting out crisp duplicates of every document I had. Deed, forged deed, bank log. I sealed one set in an envelope marked only with a small blue dot. When my phone buzzed, a voicemail from Dad slid it into my tote. The second said I'd leave with Mr. Greer. The third would go somewhere no one would think to look. By mid-morning, with a voicemail from Dad, I was walking toward the courthouse. The stone steps were icy, and the brass rail was cold against my palm. Inside, with a voicemail from Dad, the clerk's office smelled faintly of paper and lemon cleaner. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I filed a notice of potential fraud against my property title. Nothing public enough to tip off Claire, but enough to flag any transfer attempt for review. Step 2. Block her moves. From there, I headed to Mr. Greer's law office. The man himself met me in the lobby, his gray suit pressed. His voicemail was from Dad, his eyes narrowing slightly when I handed him the forged deed. That's a poor copy of your signature, he said. Voicemail from Dad. Almost insulting. I intend to treat it as such, I replied. We went over the bank log. The handwriting matched to Claire's old card. Stiva, the voicemail from Dad, the notary's name. Greer's pen scratched steadily across his legal pad. Keep acting like nothing's wrong, he advised. Petter buzz with a voicemail from Dad. People get sloppy when they think they've already won. That was exactly my plan. By the time I left, the winter light was starting to fade. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke from chimneys along Main Street. I stopped by the post office, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad and mailing one sealed envelope to an old friend in Traverse City with instructions not to open it unless she heard from me. Step 3. Spread the safety net. With a voicemail from Dad. That evening, I met Tommy at the diner off Route 9. He slid into the booth, his hair damp from the snow. From Dad? Her mom's been in and out of the lake house all week, he said quietly. Different people with her. With a voicemail from Dad. Not just that guy from before. Anyone you recognize? One looked like a lawyer. Another was carrying a camera. I stirred my coffee slowly. Voicemail Dad, then she's further along than I thought. He leaned forward. What do you want me to do? Watch. Listen. With a voicemail from Dad. Don't interfere. He frowned but nodded. Later, back in my room, I opened the small cedar box Frank had built for me years ago. Was with a voicemail from Dad. Inside was the key to the lake house's old lock. The one Claire didn't know existed, hidden behind the paneling in the study. I slipped it onto my keyring. With a voicemail from Dad, step 4, control the ground. 2 days later, just before dawn, I drove out to the lake house. The snow along the drive crunched under the tires. Inside, with a voicemail from Dad, the air was cold and still, the faint scent of cedar lingering. In the study, I found fresh stacks of papers on the desk, listing agreements, with a voicemail from Dad, property appraisals. Claire had been busy. I photographed every page, the flash briefly lighting the dark paneled walls. With a voicemail from Dad. Then I slid the originals back exactly as I'd found them. I moved through the house, checking the locks, the windows, the storage chests. In the attic, Woodone buzzed with a voicemail from under a tarp. I found the old metal file Frank had used for insurance papers. With a voicemail from Dad. Inside was a 1998 appraisal valuing the house and land at nearly double what it would fetch today. Proof that Claire's practical sale was a fraud in itself. I tucked it into my bag. Step 5, armed with history. By the time I left, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. The sky over the lake was streaked with pink and gold. I drove back slow, the frost on the windshield catching the light. Over the next week, while I'm in my buzz with a voicemail from Dad, I let my days look ordinary. I shopped for bread. I read in the cafe. I stopped by the library. But every night I reviewed the file, dates, signatures, photos. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from our friend, the statements, tightening the net, and I made sure word reached Claire, indirectly, that I was thinking about downsizing. The bait had to look real. With a voicemail from Dad. On Friday afternoon, Tommy texted again. Mom's telling people the house will be hers by spring. I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. Good, I typed back. Let her. Step 6, let the trap close. One snowy evening, Evelyn caught me at the bakery counter. With a voicemail from Dad. You're quieter than usual, she said. Quiet's good, I told her. Gives you time to think. She slid a warm loaf into a paper bag. With a voicemail from Dad. Just make sure you're thinking about what's fair to you, not just them. I carried the bread home, the smell of yeast filling the stairwell. Upstairs, Puan buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I laid the final piece of my plan on the desk. A small, velvet-covered notebook containing the combination to the lake house's hidden safe. Cohen buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Claire didn't even know it existed. Step 7, keep the ace until the last card is played. I sat back, listening to the hum of the building. Buzz with a voicemail from Dad, the faint creak of pipes. The list on my desk had grown into something more, a map of the endgame. She thought she'd box me in. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but she'd only walked into my shadow, and soon I'd turn on the light. The morning air bit at my cheeks as I stepped out of the apartment. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the folder under my arm warm from my grip. Snow clung to the curbs, dirty at the edges, the kind that lingers too long. I took the long way to Greer's office, with a voicemail from Dad, past the lakefront, letting the sight of the ice, still water settle my nerves. Inside the law office, the scent of coffee and lemon polish hung in the air. With a voicemail from Dad, Greer was already waiting in the conference room, sleeves rolled, a stack of documents spread before him. She's here? I asked. Not yet. he said, with a voicemail from Dad. We've got time. I set my folder on the table, sliding out the forged deed, the bank log, and the notarized statement. My phone buzzed voicemail from Dad. Each page felt heavier than paper had any right to. They won't see this coming, Greer said, eyes scanning the papers. The door opened sharply. With a voicemail from Dad, Claire walked in first, her heels clicking against the wood floor, followed by a man in a pinstripe suit. A voicemail gal from Dad. She wore a smirk I'd seen before, the one she used when she thought she'd already won. Morning, she said, drawing the word out. I trust we're ready to finalize. Greer motioned to the chairs. Let's begin. The man with her introduced himself as her attorney. With a voicemail from Dad, he opened a leather portfolio, sliding a document toward me. Transfer of ownership as agreed. I didn't touch it. With a voicemail from Dad. I haven't agreed to anything. Claire's smirk faltered just slightly. We've been over this, Margaret. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. It's better for everyone if. Greer cut in. Before we proceed, we have some preliminary matters. He laid the forged deed on the table. From Dad, this is the document filed with the county. Our client did not sign it. Claire leaned back. Looks signed to me. I leaned forward. With a voicemail from Dad. You'd know better than most. Her attorney frowned. Do you have proof? Greer slid over the bank log. The notary's statement clipped on top. The Forest Farm Bucks Feliz Kamem Dad. Here's the visitor record from the bank the day this was notarized. The handwriting matches Ms. Matthews's. Not our client's. The silence stretched. With a voicemail from Dad. Outside, a snowplow's distant scrape against asphalt filled the room. Claire's attorney cleared his throat. With a voicemail from Dad. Even if there were an irregularity or fraud, I corrected. Greer tapped the folder. And we're not done. The door opened again. Fred and Tommy stepped in. He looked straight at Claire, his jaw tight. I saw her, he said. With that man. Fouad, going through Grandma's desk? Claire's color rose. You dragged my son into this? No, I said. You did. Greer gathered the papers, buzzed the voicemail from Dad, stacking them neatly. We can continue this discussion informally, or I can walk these over to the sheriff's office right now. Your choice? Claire's smirk was gone. The man beside her shifted in his seat. I sat back, hands folded. What's it going to be? She didn't answer. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Not yet. Claire's fingers drummed against the table, the sharp tap echoing in the quiet room. Her attorney leaned toward her. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, murmuring something I couldn't hear, she shook her head, eyes fixed on me like I'd stepped somewhere I didn't belong. I opened my folder again. I sliding out a thin, yellowed document. This, I said, is a property appraisal from 1998, done before the market dipped. Value back then, with a voicemail from Dad. Nearly double what you've been telling people it's worth now. Greer angled the page toward Claire's attorney, with a voicemail from Dad. When you try to sell below value to a private contact, especially one connected to you, it's fraud. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. You'd be setting yourself up for a criminal investigation. Her mouth twitched. That's ridiculous. I laid down the next piece, Frank's letter, with a voicemail from Dad. The envelope was worn soft from years of keeping it close. I unfolded it slowly, letting the paper whisper against the table, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Frank wrote this after we signed the lake house deed together. In his own hand, he stated that the property should remain in my name for my lifetime, without exception. That letter's been notarized since 2003. Claire's eyes flicked to the paper, then back to me. Dodd? You're waving around sentimental junk? Maybe? I said evenly. But the county registrar doesn't think so. With a voicemail from Dad. This letter's attached to my title file. It's public record now. Her attorney reached for the document, but Greer placed a flat hand on it. With a voicemail from Dad. From Dad. You'll get your own copy through Discovery, if it comes to that. The room was warm, but I felt the cold satisfaction of watching her confidence erode. With a voicemail from Dad. Every breath she took was shallower, her gaze darting to the door as if she could leave without consequence. Claire, Greer said, his tone shifting. With a voicemail. From Dad. We're offering you the chance to walk away quietly. No sheriff, no court, no headlines, but you give up any claim to the lake house, now and forever. In writing. Today. Her attorney shifted uncomfortably. We'll need time, No, I said. We finish this now. Claire looked at me. Really, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Really looked like she was seeing the lines in my face, the steadiness in my hands, the patience she'd mistaken for weakness. "Vervuko, you think you're clever?" she muttered. "No," I replied, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. "I think I'm done letting you take what isn't yours." The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the pause that followed. Outside, a gust rattled the window. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, sending a shiver through the frame, Claire's attorney leaned toward her again. "If they take this to the sheriff, it's going to get messy." Would Buzzbills buzzed the voicemail from Dad, and you could lose more than just the house. Her jaw tightened. She reached for the pen in front of her, but stopped, her fingers curling back. Voice from Dad. "Before I sign anything," she said slowly, "I want to know exactly what you've got. All of it." I glanced at Greer. He gave a barely there nod. Was with a voicemail from Dad. I reached into the folder for the last piece, one she didn't even know existed. I slid the final envelope onto the table, velvet covered, its edges worn smooth from years hidden away. Claire's eyes followed it like a cat tracking a shadow. "This," I said, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, "has been in a safe you don't know about. Behind the study wall panel, next to the cedar beam Frank carved our initials into." Her fingers twitched. "Isa buzzed with a voicemail from Dad." I opened the envelope and drew out the lake house deed, thick paper, embossed seal intact, signatures crisp. "This is the original. Filed and recorded 23 years ago." Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and here, I tapped the corner, are the official seals proving it's never been transferred. Claire's attorney leaned forward, with a voicemail from Dad, his face draining a shade paler. "Where has this been?" "Where it was safe," I said. The phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. "Away from people who think forged paper and fast talk can replace the truth." Greer added, coupled with the notary statement, the bank log, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. "The appraisal and the letter from Mr. Hill, this ends any claim your client has. If she persists, with a voicemail from Dad, we'll file criminal charges and civil for damages." The hum of the heating system filled the silence. With a voicemail from Dad, Claire stared at the deed like it might burn her fingers if she touched it. I wasn't done. Buzz with a voicemail from Dad, I pulled out one more sheet, a bank record from a joint account Frank had opened before he passed. The account was in my name alone now. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the balance enough to keep the lake house running for decades. "This," I said, "isn't yours either, but I know you've been circling it." With a voicemail from Dad, "Consider it locked, permanently." Her head snapped up. "How?" "Because I listen when people think I'm not listening," I said. For a moment. With a voicemail from Dad, her eyes blazed. Then the fire dulled, replaced by calculation. "You want me to sign away any claim?" she said flatly. "Yes," Greer replied. The voicemail from Dad. "And you'll do it now. Or we go to the sheriff today." The ticking clock seemed louder than breathing. Claire's attorney murmured something. With a voicemail from Dad. But she cut him off with a sharp gesture. She took the pen, scrawled her name across the waiver Greer had prepared, and pushed it back across the table. "There?" she said. "Happy?" I met her gaze. Satisfied. Greer gathered the signed document, slid it into a folder, and locked it in his briefcase, with a voicemail from Dad. "We're done here." Claire stood abruptly, chair legs scraping the floor. Without another word, she left, her attorney trailing behind. The phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. The sound of the outer door closing echoed in the conference room like the final note of a song. For a long moment I sat still, the weight of the deed solid under my palm. The air felt lighter. Greer gave a small smile. With a voicemail from Dad. "You handled that better than most." "I've had practice," I said. Outside, the snow had started again. Soft, slow flakes drifting over the lake. With a voicemail from Dad. Erasing footprints. I pulled my coat tighter, stepped into the cold, and headed toward the street. It wasn't Victor I felt, exactly. More like the deep. Foreman buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Steady breath of someone who's been holding it for too long. The house was still mine. And so was my peace. The days after the meeting felt quiet. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Not the tense kind, where you wait for the phone to ring or for someone to knock at the door. This was the kind of quiet that settles into your bones. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Loosens the knot between your shoulders. No calls from Claire. No thinly veiled messages through Tommy. Not even the occasional envelope from her lawyer. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, it was as if they'd both stepped off the map, leaving only the echo of their footsteps fading into nothing. I didn't mind. The lake abuzz with a voicemail from Dad. The lake house deed sat in a lockbox at Greer's office now. Every so often he'd call to confirm the files were secure, his voice steady and certain. With a voicemail from Dad. Evelyn kept a fresh loaf of bread for me on Thursdays, sliding it across the counter with a knowing smile but no questions. With a voicemail from Dad. Tommy stopped by on a Sunday afternoon. He was taller than I remembered, his hair falling into his eyes. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. He handed me a grocery bag filled with apples and cinnamon rolls. "Thought you could use these?" he said. I poured us coffee, the steam curling into the air. When a phone buzzed with a mail from Dad and we sat at the kitchen table, the winter light fell across the wood grain, pale and soft. "She's not happy?" he admitted after a long sip. Voicemail? From Dad. I imagine not. "But she's quieter. She's not talking about the lake house anymore." "That's good," I replied. Buzz with a voicemail from Dad. Though I kept my tone even, inside I felt a slow, steady relief. Not gloating, just the satisfaction of knowing the line had been drawn and held. A buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. We talked about smaller things after that. His classes, the weather, whether the ice on the lake would hold for skating this year. When he left, whisked with a voicemail from Dad, I walked him to the door. Snowflakes caught in his hair as he waved from the car, and for a moment, with a voicemail from Dad, I thought about all the times I'd watched someone drive away from me. This time, the feeling was different. There was no emptiness in it, just space. I buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Later that week, I took a walk down to the lake. The shoreline was edged in white, the water dark and still. I stood there for a while, when I buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. My breath misting in the air and thought about Frank. He would have smiled at how it ended. Not because it was a victory in the usual sense, with a voicemail from Dad, but because it was clean. No shouting matches in public, no ugly scenes, just the truth lit out plainly enough for even the most stubborn person to see. With a voicemail from Dad. Back at the apartment, I started sorting through drawers. Old receipts, photographs, letters I hadn't looked at in years. I made 3 piles: keep, store, let go. The last pile grew fastest. Evelyn noticed the boxes stacked near the door when she came by with soup. "You moving?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "Dad, but soon." Her eyebrows lifted. "Where to?" "Someplace by the water." "Not here." "Not yet sure where." She nodded, as if she'd expected the answer. For a buzz with a voicemail from Dad. The snow kept falling day after day, softening the edges of everything. In the evenings, I'd light the small lamp by my chair, open a book with a voicemail from Dad, and read until the words blurred. The silence felt earned. By early February, the worst of the storms had passed. The sidewalks were still edged with snow when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but the air carried that faint, almost imperceptible hint that spring might come eventually. I'd finished clearing most of the apartment with a voicemail from Dad. The keep boxes were labeled and stacked neatly. The store boxes were already at the storage unit by the lake road. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. The let go pile had been carted off by a thrift store van, the driver thanking me like I'd done him a favor, with a voicemail from Dad. Evelyn stopped by one afternoon with a thermos of tea. She perched on the edge of the chair, looking around at the half-bare shelves. "You're really going," she said. "Yes," I answered. "It's time." "It's time?" She tilted her head. "And the lake house?" "It stays mine," I said, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. "But I don't have to live there for it to be mine." She smiled at that, the corners of her eyes crinkling. From Dad. The Frank would be proud. I didn't answer right away. Pride wasn't quite the word I was feeling, more like release. A few days later, Tommy came by again, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. He looked more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. We sat in the living room, mugs of tea between us. "Mom's different," he said. "Not better. From Daff, that not exactly. Just less dangerous." "That's enough for me," I replied. He hesitated, then asked, "Are you sure about leaving?" "Yes," I said. From Dad. "This isn't running away. It's moving toward something else." He nodded slowly. "I get it." Quiver buzz with a voicemail from Dad. I'll miss you being close." "You'll know where to find me," I said, smiling. "And the lake house will always be there." Lock. Combe buzzed with a voicemail from But There. We talked for hours. About books, about his plans after school, about places neither of us had been but wanted to see. By the time he left, with a voicemail from Dad, the street lamps had come on, casting long shadows across the snow. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter, not to Claire, not to Tommy, with a voicemail from Dad, not even to Evelyn. It was to myself I wrote about the days I'd felt small, the mornings I'd woken up with dread in my chest. I buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the quiet meals eaten in the shadow of someone else's taking. And then I wrote about this winter. The snow, the stillness. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the steady reclaiming of what was mine. When I was done, I folded the letter and tucked it into the cedar box with the deed. Not as proof for anyone else. Form of her buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but as a reminder for me. On my last evening in town, I walked to the lake one more time. The ice was breaking up, jagged lines running through its surface. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the air smelled faintly of thawing earth. I stood there until my fingers went numb, watching the water shift under the pale light. There was no grand farewell. 40 when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, no speeches. Just the soft scrape of the apartment door closing behind me, the click of the lock turning for the last time I'd kept the lake house with a voicemail from Dad. I'd kept my name on every paper that mattered. And most importantly, I'd kept the part of myself they thought they could take. The rest. Where I'd go with a voicemail from Dad. What I'd do would unfold on my terms. I walked into the night, the snow crunching under my boots, carrying only what I needed. The quiet followed me. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and this time it felt like freedom. The town I chose was just over 2 hours west, but it felt like another world. The moment I stepped off the bus, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I caught the scent of pine and wood smoke, the air lighter than the heavy stillness I'd left behind. The streets were narrow, the buildings painted and soft. With a voicemail from Dad, a faded colors, and beyond them, a stretch of lake that glittered even in the weak morning sun. I rented a small cottage at the edge of town, furtive when my phone buzzed a voicemail from Dad, close enough to hear the water at night when the wind shifted. The place had a wraparound porch, a stove that ticked softly as it cooled. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad and windows that caught the early light. The first night there, I didn't unpack right away. I made tea, sat on the porch, with a voicemail from Dad, and let the sound of the lake fill the silence. It was different from the quiet I'd known in the apartment. This wasn't absence, it was presence. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the kind that hummed with possibility, within a week, I'd found the town library. It was small, with worn carpet and a bell that jingled when the door opened. Dad, the librarian, Mrs. Callahan, asked if I was visiting. Settling in, I said. She tilted her head. Well, with a voicemail from Dad, we can always use volunteers. By the end of the month, I had a key to the back room where old donations gathered dust. I sorted them slowly when Favre buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, uncovering first editions, forgotten family Bibles, even a box of children's books with inscriptions in looping script. I cleaned each one with a voicemail from Dad, lined them on shelves, and by spring that back room had become a reading nook for the town's kids. Tommy called every Sunday. Sometimes Evelyn joined in, with a voicemail from Dad. Her voice warmed through the line. They told me about the lake back home thawing, about how Claire had moved her focus elsewhere. I listened, with a voicemail but I didn't ask for details. My peace wasn't tied to what she did anymore. One afternoon, a voicemail from Dad. A girl of about 9 came into the library clutching a worn paperback. She asked if she could borrow another one, but her library card had expired, with a voicemail from Dad. I covered the fee myself and signed the new card with her name in careful print. Her grin was wide enough to light the dusty corners. Walking home that day, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I realized something that the lake house wasn't the only legacy I had. These small acts, keeping a book in a child's hands, showing up for Sunday calls, with a voicemail from Dad, making tea for neighbors, were part of it too. That night, I sat at my desk and opened the cedar box. The deed was still there. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Frank's letter folded neatly on top. I touched the paper but didn't unfold it. I didn't need to read the words to know I'd honored them. The voicemail from the wind off the ladled the windows, I left them open anyway. The sound was like breathing, steady, alive, and mine. By early summer, then buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. The lake had shed its winter skin. The water shimmered under long days, dotted with fishing boats and the occasional kayak. Carvem when my phone telephone to buzz with wood it. I'd planted pots of lavender and rosemary along the porch rail, their scent mingling with the tang of the lake breeze. When my phone had buzzed with the voicemail from Dad, Tommy came to visit the first weekend in June. He stepped off the bus with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and a grin that carried the boy I'd once known. Mail from Dad? This place is. He looked around at the cottage, the lake beyond. Ooh, perfect for you, I laughed. It's enough, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. That's all I need. We spent the afternoon walking along the shore, our shoes sinking into the warm sand. Buzz with a voicemail from Dad. He skipped stones like he used to when he was little, counting under his breath. On the third try, he got to 5 skips. That evening, and I'm buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I cooked trout from the morning's market. We ate on the porch, the sun dipping low, streaking the sky with pink and gold. Dad, do you miss it? He asked suddenly. The lake house. I thought about it. No, I said finally. I miss what it was, but not what it became. Buzz with a voicemail from Dad, and I still have it, just not in the way they wanted. He nodded, understanding more than his age should have allowed. After dinner, we sat with mugs of tea, with a voicemail from Dad, watching the first fireflies flicker along the grass. I told him about the library, the little girl with the worn paperback. With a voicemail from Dad, the way the town gathered for Sunday music on the pier. You've built something here, he said. I'm building, I corrected. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. It's still happening. The next morning, before he left, we stood on the porch. He hugged me longer than usual. You're different, he said softly. From Dad, I'm me, I replied. Maybe for the first time in a while. When his bus pulled away, I stayed on the porch until the dust settled. Dust with a voicemail from Dad. The lake stretched out before me, endless and calm. Later, I opened the cedar box again, not to check the deed, but to place something new inside. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad and a photograph of the cottage porch, lavender in bloom, lake in the background. On the back I wrote, "This is where I remembered how to belong to myself." With voicemail Dad. Closing the box, I felt no pull to the past, no weight from what had been taken or almost lost. My legacy wasn't a single place. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, or even a single fight, it was the choice to live with my hands open, holding what mattered and letting go of what didn't. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the wind carried the scent of rosemary through the window. I breathed it in slow and deep. The quiet was still with me, and it was exactly where I wanted to be. From Dad. Closing summary and audience call to action. Some folks think justice comes with noise. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, mine came with a door clicking shut behind someone who thought they owned my life. I didn't shout, I didn't beg, I didn't make them understand. Sipping while my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I just kept what was mine and built the rest somewhere they couldn't touch. That's the thing about getting older. With a voicemail from Dad, folks, people mistake quiet for surrender, but quiet can be the sharpest edge you carry. I kept my house. I kept my name. Most of all, I kept myself. Now, with a voicemail from Dad, when I sit on my porch, the lake breathing in and out in front of me, I know every battle I fought was worth it. Not for revenge from Dad, but for the right to choose my own peace.